Kalamazoo County with fishing expert, fishing instructor Bob Musselman. Bob, you have the claim of probably catching more big bass in Michigan than anybody else.
I've caught a few big ones, yes.
Well, a few. You have 5 of them right here. Tell me about these bass. Where were they caught? How big are they?
These 3 bass are 8 pounds or better.
Wow.
Those are largemouth bass.
Okay.
And they were all caught within 20 minutes of my home in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Okay, and that's where we're going.
That's where we're going today, yes.
Okay, terrific. All caught in Michigan, whopper bass. On what? What do you catch these on? Do you fish with natural bait, lures, what?
I fish with lures, and I fish mostly in very heavy weed cover.
Oh, let's go back to your tackle box here and talk about some of the lures that we'll be using.
Okay. Today we're going to be using 3 different types of lures. We're going to be using crankbaits today.
Okay.
It's a deep diving lure.
Okay.
We're also going to be using spinner baits. That's a safety pin type
Safety pin
lure.
spinner.
Yes.
Okay. We pull both of these go deep.
They will, but we use this near the surface spread.
Okay.
And then, my favorite, we're going to be using a pork rind. Pork rind with a weedless hook.
That's all that is an imitation frog?
Yes, it is.
Supposed to be.
Yes. And we use a weedless hook so that it's very weedless. We use it in very heavy weed cover.
Okay, how effective are these? Which is the most effective?
Well, I've caught my biggest bass on this. Very simple lure. I've caught, I have 3 bass there that are 8 pounds or better that I have caught.
On that little thing?
Yes, on this.
If you don't mind, Bob, I'll use that this afternoon.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's go. Okay, Bob, this is where we're supposed to fish, huh?
This is it, Fred.
Okay, I only see 4 problems. Things I've read about bass fishing before, how you're supposed to do it. Here we are in the heat of the summer, number 1, right in the middle of the summer. We're here at noon in the middle of the day.
Right.
You have us here in about 3 feet of water. The bass are supposed to be out in the deep water. And number 4, this lake is built up, residential. There must be 1 million people using it. How are we going to catch bass?
Fortunately, Fred, hardly anyone fishes in these thick lily pads.
No wonder. They've been reading the same articles I have.
Well, we have a method that we use in the lily pads. You can't just use any old lure in here because you're going to get hung up.
Sure.
So we use that little pork frog that I was showing you.
Okay, well show me how you do this with a casting reel.
All right, fine, with a casting reel. We make very short casts, maybe 20, 25-foot casts, and the frog lands on a lily pad because there's very little water there.
Okay.
We start working that, and we see those little pockets of water, and we want to get that to drop into the pocket of water so the bass can at least get at it. Okay, it's sitting on a lily pad now, and I'm going to slip that into the water. Now, if there was a big bass there, he would have hit that, Fred, but there's no big bass right there. Well, that's how you work it, very slowly. Slip it off the pads. They think it's a frog, and frog is a good meal for them, and that's what they want. Here, try it, Fred.
I'm going to give it a fling. Boy, I like these new bait casting reels.
Yes.
Whip it right out there without a backlash. Okay, just work it over. But explain to me, Bob, why everything I've read says that bass are not found in the shallow water in the heat of the day in the middle of the summer. They're out in the deep water.
Many bass are out in the deep water, but as you can see, this type of weed cover is very thick. And it's so thick, in fact, that there's very little water showing. It looks like you and I can almost get out there and do some walking. The bass will lie under here because there's almost an unlimited supply of food. There are schools of minnows, there's lots of insects, and many people don't realize this, but bass eat insects. They eat what we call aquatic insects, which will cling to the stems of these lily pads.
Dragonflies.
See, you had an overrun there.
Well,
Fred. That's all right.
No big deal.
Sure. And the bass will be near their food supply because they don't want to have to go halfway across the lake to get a meal. The meal is right there for them. They have plenty of shelter from the sun. They don't have eyelids like you and I, and they're very sensitive to the sun. And as you can see by this thick pad cover here. If the bass are under there, they're in the shade. And another thing, the water is very cool under there. The sun's rays aren't penetrating down through there to warm up the water.
So what you're saying is, Bob, that this offers all the protection, all the food that the deep water does for the bass, right?
That's right, and it's easier to find the fish here.
Except it's sort of a pain to fish it.
Well, yes, but the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. When you catch an 8-pound bass out of here, Fred, you're never going to complain about the fact that it's a pain to fish it.
Right.
Or even a 4-pounder, I think we'd settle for.
I'll take that. So this is, how do we know when to move on? When we've covered an area, how long do we sit
Well,
here?
we don't cover an area very thoroughly. We will fan our casts so that we're not going to cast in the same spot every time. And once we've fanned our casts within the radius of our casting distance, then we will move on.
Move on, okay.
About 50 feet or so, and then fan our casts in that area.
What lure are you going to be using?
In here,
yeah.
I'm going to be using the same thing you are, Fred.
Okay.
That's about the only thing that we can use in these real heavy lily pads.
Why don't we move up another 50 feet and do it?
Sure, let's do that.
See what we come up with. A bass boat can be a big help to fishermen, but today's small cars and high price of gasoline have made smaller, lighter weight boats more practical. Let's take a minute to look at how Bob shaved the weight and the price off his bass boat.
The motor, well, this is an electric motor, has a 12-volt battery, and this little doodad here is a weed guard. And this allows us to go through very heavy weed cover, for instance, through lily pads. Without this, the weeds would get around the prop and the motor would go nowhere.
Okay, well, let's look at some of the other features you have here on your homemade customized bass boat. Let's see, what's in here? Is this your...
Well, that's the 12-volt battery, which operates the electric motor. And then I have a couple of...
little buoys you throw out when you catch a fish? So
That's right. That's right, to mark the spots.
Okay, now what about these characteristic seats here on a bass boat? Did these come with this boat?
No, they didn't. Those are custom seats that I had.
So you put in the seats?
Yes, I did.
How much do those run?
Oh, they run about $35 a piece. They're a cushioned seat with a fold-down back on them.
Okay. What about these railings here?
I had those installed so that if I tie up to a dock, I can tie very easily to this.
Okay. Now you store your lures in this little foam padding. Geez, they come out and hang in there real easily.
That's right. I take these lures out before I start fishing. I don't like to open the tackle box in the boat. It makes noise. So I take the lures out, and all of the lures that I figure I'll fish with that day, I will line up on this foam.
Super idea, super idea. Well, what about the carpeting? I assume that's in there for noise?
That's right. It's for noise and to keep from slipping. Sometimes the bottom of a boat will get very slippery, especially if you've caught some fish and they've been flopping around. So we put carpeting on there to deaden the noise, to deaden the sound, so we don't scare fish, and also to keep from slipping down in the boat.
Well, that couldn't have cost much to make those improvements. What about your rod racks here?
Well, I like to have my rods out of the way, tucked out of the way. We can store them here. I store them here all the time, even when I'm not using the boat on a fishing trip. And they can hold 6 rods. I have 3 in there now.
Okay, let's see. You mounted a little ruler here so you can measure your fish.
That's right. That's glued down.
What about the console? Did this come with the boat?
No, it didn't. I bought that separately, and that's an electric start console. We can operate from the middle seat here.
Okay, well, let's move on down here, see what else we have. What's in here?
That's just a storage compartment, Fred. And sometimes if we're pike fishing, catch some long pike, we'll put those in here also.
All right, you could use that as a cooler probably to take some cold drinks out on the boat with you. And your motor, just a modest 25 horse, not like those big 85s or some of the big ones they use on the expensive bass boats.
That's right.
Electric start, here's your battery. Okay, what do we have under this compartment? What's this?
Well, that's our live well, Fred. And I've installed a little thing there that allows the water to come in from the lake, so we have circulating water to keep the fish alive. Okay, the fish that you catch. You don't use it for bait. That's right, the fish that we catch. Okay. Did it come with that plug? No, it didn't. You installed that too? Yes, I did. Golly, okay, you have your life preservers here, a net for all those big bass,
And finally, let's look at this anchor reel you have here, Bob. So one man, I assume, you can operate this yourself when you're fishing.
Oh yes, and it stores the line on it.
How does it work?
Well, you see that little black thing there?
Okay.
Give that a twist, Fred.
Whoop! Okay, so you let your anchor down and what? Just crank it up?
Just crank it right back up.
Oh, that is handy.
Now see how that nests in there?
Look at that. Isn't that something?
That's right.
Got to try that again. Whoop. Boy, that's simple. That is handy. Well, Bob, you've really done a number on this bass boat. How much would it cost for a guy to buy a 14-foot boat like this to customize it the way you've done?
Oh, I would say about $800 altogether, including the extras that I have on the boat. Not including the motor, Fred.
Right. Well, that's quite a deal. Quite a handy tip from Bob Musselman, who's figured out how an average fisherman can make a bass boat for himself that has all the luxuries you'd ever want, and it doesn't have to cost you 8 or 10 grand. Oh, okay. Got one, Bob. Oh, look at this. He's hung up in the weeds. There we go. Grab him by the lip?
Grab him by the lower lip.
Okay.
Grab him by the lower lip with thumb and forefinger.
There we go.
Okay, you got him. That's not
Well, he's a little devil.
I think we should throw that one back.
Throw this one back?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a little devil, but you're right, they're in here. How big of a bass have you caught in these lily pads like this?
Over 8 pounds.
Wow.
In this particular spot, yes.
It's incredible. Now, what? I must have done all right setting the hook.
You did. Hey, you did real well.
Boy, I can hardly get this hook out of this guy's mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd
Really?
let him go, Fred. Let him grow up.
There he goes. Well, let's go back and get another one. Get something a little bigger. Oh, wow.
You got him?
He hit pretty close, didn't he, Bob?
Yeah, he did.
Well, he couldn't have been more than, what, 15 feet from the boat.
We're going to use the old bottom lip method here.
Sure.
We'll end up in the emergency room of the hospital. You open them out.
There we go.
There we go. Oh, that's a nice little bass.
Sure. That's a keeper. Well, geez, Bob, you're proving they're in here. Gonna put him in the bait box or in the fire?
Why don't I just release him and let you fellas see him get there. Bye-bye.
Look at this. We got a little rain and you got a little fish. But you're using a crankbait or a
Spinnerbait.
Spinnerbait.
Yeah.
Oh, and now the rain's coming down. What do you think? Is this rain going to help fishing?
Yes, it should. It should help. Great. Oh, let's get him in.
Well, again, not a bad one and caught in the lily pads. Oh, that rain's coming down now.
That's a nice little bass.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Let's let him grow.
Before Bob could dress that spinnerbait with pork rind and show me how this lure can really pay off, a rainstorm was upon us, so we hightailed it back home.
Well, Bob, looks like we took on a little water here.
We sure did. About 3 inches of water, Fred.
Crying out loud. Well, we got blown off the lake, but you showed me that you can catch bass in the middle of the day, in the middle of the summer, in 3 feet of water.
You sure can.
That's terrific. Well, we're going to have to go back after him in, a few weeks.
Bob and I fished together several more times in August in his new aluminum bass boat, and several times we fished from shore. Because Bob is a field tester for Uncle Josh, we used a variety of pork rind combinations, and rain or shine, we took bass every time. He gave me quite an education.
Pork rind has been around for 50 years or so, and it's amazing to me that so few fishermen actually are familiar with using the variety of pork rind that is on the market. Most people who have used them maybe use a Johnson silver minnow with a pork frog, and that's the extent of their experience with this type of a bait. But most people don't realize the variety of pork rinds that are available. They come in all different sizes and shapes. There are lots of different colors, and they really give good action to the lures that they're attached to. And the important thing is they catch fish. I've been very successful catching fish on pork baits, and there are a few basic things that people should know about using pork baits. For instance, the weedless hook with a pork frog. I've found that the size 2-aught weedless hook works best. We use a jumbo-sized pork frog with this. Now, all of the pork rinds have a slit in them so that the hook can go through, and when you use the weedless hook with a jumbo frog, you want to put the hook through the bottom of the frog, from the bottom and then out through the top. So you can see it's very simple to rig up the weedless hook with a pork frog, and you've seen that we catch fish that way. But there are other ways to use the frog. Probably the most popular way to use it is on the back end of a Johnson silver spoon. Remember, when you're using a spoon with a pork frog, use a slow retrieve, because if you go fast, you're going to lose a lot of the action. As you can see this going through the water, the spoon is rocking back and forth, and that makes that pork frog really kick, and that's what excites the fish. If that doesn't excite a bass, he just isn't human. You can also work it much slower in the water because the pork frog is very buoyant and actually holding up the spoon. The advantage of that is when you're working fairly heavy weed cover, the bass doesn't always have a real good crack at the bait. So the slower you work it over his den, the better chance he has of latching onto it. When you work a combination like this very fast, you're going to get a lot of missed strikes. It not only catches bass, but it's an excellent pike lure. And once in a while, we even catch a catfish with it. In addition to using the pork frog with a spoon, you can use the eel or the split tail, or you can use a ripple rind. So there are a lot of pork rind and spoon combinations that you can use. One day, one of them might be successful. Another day, another method might be more successful. Using the weedless hook with a pork frog and the spoons with a variety of pork baits is basically shallow water type fishing. Fishing over the top of weed beds or around stumps and stick-ups, over the top of sunken islands. Wherever there's a lot of heavy weed cover, that's a good place to use these methods. But when you're faced with deep water fishing, the jig and eel combination seems to be a winner. You can use a jig and eel combination in farm ponds that are dug out. You can use it in drop-offs on lakes. It's very popular to use down south in the impoundments, in the man-made lakes, which are very, very deep. They have a lot of deep water structure, and the jig and eel combination is excellent for that type of fishing. There are lots of different types of jigs. Some of them are just a plain lead head with a plain hook, nothing on it. We have bucktail jigs, have them with marabou. We have the vinyl skirts, and also the new live rubber skirts. The new live rubber skirts are very popular down south. Now, the jigs oftentimes are used without any dressing, but I prefer to put pork rind on them. It gives them much better action. We use the split tail eel. We also use what's called the spring lizard pup, which is very good with a jig, and the jumbo pork frog. I like to use a split tail eel with a jig. It has very good action. It sinks rather quickly, and the tail flutters as the jig drops toward the bottom of the lake. A lot of times you'll get a hit on the drop, so you have to be very, very alert when you're fishing this method. You have to watch that line very closely, and any little twitch or hesitation means that there might be a bass on the other end, and you want to respond by really setting the hook hard. And sometimes it isn't even a bass. This looks like a pike here. That's what it is, thrashing around on the top there. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Boy, I hate to lose him. That was a good pike. But I caught him on a jig and eel. The pork rind and spinnerbait combinations are really deadly. Spinnerbaits are the most versatile lure that you can have in your tackle box. You can buzz them on the surface, you can bump them on the bottom, or count them down to any depth in between the top and the bottom. So you can use a spinnerbait under almost any type of condition. So there are a variety of spinnerbaits that we can use, single spins and double spins. We can increase or decrease the size of the spinners. We can use different colored spinnerbaits, and we can use a variety of pork rind on them. We can use a bass strip, we use a ripple rind, or even a pork frog. So there's almost an infinite variety of combinations that we can use with the spinnerbait. One of the new things that has really caught my fancy is the ripple rind. That action on the back of a spinnerbait is just indescribable. Look at that go through the water. And it's pretty hard, I would say, for a bass to ignore that as it goes past his den. The ripple rind has a treasured spot in my tackle box. I just wouldn't be without a couple of jars in my box. And I use it on spinnerbaits. It has tantalizing action no matter whether you're reeling it fast or slow through the water or whether it's just dropping toward the bottom. It has the same action. It sort of has a built-in action, and we don't necessarily use it with a spinnerbait. We can use it with a spoon or a variety of other lures. So it really is a versatile pork rind, and it's a lure that you're going to see a lot of fishermen using in the future in a variety of ways. Fishermen are realizing that pork rind is very, very tough, and the fish won't hit it and tear it to pieces like they do some other baits. So its toughness is a real advantage to fishermen. I've had fishermen ask me what pork rind is made of. Well, it's actually the skin and the fat of a pig. It's what they call the fat back part of a pig. You have to be careful not to let it dry out. If that pork rind sits out in the sun for a half hour or so, it's going to dry out. So what I do is I keep a rag in my boat, I dip it in the water, get it wet, and then I just wrap my pork rind in it while it isn't being used during the fishing trip. Now at the end of the fishing trip, of course, I take it off the hook. I make sure that the barb of the hook goes right back through the slit. But with a little experience, you can get this off the hook every time and get it back into the jar so that you can use it on your next fishing trip. There's a unique advantage to using pork rind baits. You can trim them or cut them to any size or shape that you wish. If you're using a bass strip, for instance, you may want a little more action in the tail, so just take a razor blade and split that tail a little more so you get more action as it goes through the water. Or you might want to trim down the body of a pork chunk a little bit so it rides a little differently through the water. So you can experiment with pork rind baits, and that's something you can't do with most types of baits. I've caught a lot of big lunker bass with a pork frog and weedless hook and the lily pads. But I have another lure that's almost as good. I use a spinnerbait, I remove the skirt, and put a big pork frog on the back end. And that really attracts the lunkers. Sometimes I'm even surprised with what I catch. Now I'm going to show you something else. Look at that big one. Hey, look at that. Man, oh man. And this is the dog days. This is when you're not supposed to catch big fish. Many fishermen associate pork rind lures with just largemouth fishing, but they can be used for stripers, walleye, and a variety of other species all over the country. Boy, that's another nice bass. Hey, we got two back-to-back. Look at that bass. He'd go about 6 pounds. Not very often you get two big bass like that back-to-back. Don't think I catch big bass like this every time I go out, because I don't. There are times when I don't catch a thing, and I think every fisherman has that same experience. We were fishing in August, and we were fishing during the hottest days of the summer, in the middle of the day. That's when they say fish don't hit. Well, you and I know better. We can catch them.
Bob Musselman knows how to catch him with pork rind, and here's another fellow from a different part of the country who's been a prize-winning pork rind bass fisherman, Dick Collier from Springfield, Missouri. Dick has gained quite a reputation in that part of the country for winning bass tournaments. He fishes a jig and pork frog for bass that are suspended in deep water. Dick's favorite method is to use a heavy jig, somewhere between 3/8 and 5/8 of an ounce, and he leaves the live rubber skirt on the jig. He uses a free spool reel with 15-pound test line, and to add that extra action that makes the difference, he puts a medium-sized pork frog on the jig. These southern impoundments are deep, 30, 40, 50, 60 feet deep, and most people fish the shoreline for bass. Well, this is good in the spring and fall, but for summer fishing, Dick has found the big fish out in the deep water, not on the bottom, but suspended in the treetops or occasionally in open water. When Dick determines the depth he thinks the bass are at, he'll try to fish exclusively at that depth. He'll make his cast, count it down to the right depth, and retrieve it. He says the bass often hit the pork while it's sinking, so you have to be ready at all times. Does this technique pay off? Well, just watch as Dick Collier and his fishing buddy Jerry Cawthra spend a day fishing in the Mid-America Bass Tournament on Table Rock Lake, Missouri. Within a half hour from the starting pistol, the first bass was aboard. "272 fishing teams entered this tournament, one of the largest in the country. And these are serious fishermen. You can tell by the money they put into their bass boats. The year before, Dick Collier and Jerry Cawthra walked off with the first prize. So when they brought their bass in to be weighed, all eyes were on their fish. By the way, in these tournaments, the fish are kept in live wells in the boats, transferred to the scales in plastic bags of water, weighed, and returned to the lake as soon as possible. Most people expected Dick and Jerry to be in the prize money, but the chances of winning first prize 2 years in a row was not very high. 218 boats didn't even catch one legal bass. But the big prize winners for the second year in a row with 7 bass weighing 18 pounds, 13 ounces, were Dick Collier and Jerry Cawthra. $2,000 cash and a $3,000 bass boat. All their fish caught on jigs with pork frogs. Wherever you fish in the United States, pork rind can take bass even during those dog days of summer. You know some techniques, you've seen them work, so get out there and try it. Remember, dry lines never catch fish.
Whether it's raining, whether the sun's beating down the middle of the day, that doesn't make any difference. You're going to catch your share of fish if you get out there whenever you get a chance. And who knows, maybe you'll catch one of those dog day lunkers.